Hi viewers, welcome back to MasterJSkills. In today's video, we will see Spring Boot architecture. So if you are new to this channel, please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get all the notification of my channel. So without making delay, let's jump into the understanding what is the Spring Boot architecture. As we already know that the Spring Boot relies on Spring framework. When it relies on Spring framework, then it follows the Spring MVC architecture itself, except a repository layer. So the repository layer itself is eliminated from the Spring Boot. How? Spring's repository classes extending a CRUD repository, so it is injected into the service itself in the Spring Boot architecture. So it is completely the same structure or the same architecture as a MVC architecture, Spring MVC architecture, except the repository. So it has some theory. So Spring Boot relies heavily on Spring framework, which means that it integrates almost all the features and models of a Spring, like a Spring MVC, Spring Core, and so on. But there is no demand for your DO IMPL classes. So it doesn't force us to write our DO IMPL. Completely the repository layer, it doesn't force us to write. So instead of that, it will inject into the service layer itself. Spring Boot follows a well-defined architecture flow to streamline application development. At its core, it leverages the Spring framework's powerful features and adds a layer of a simplicity. So it has a simple MVC architecture, nothing more than that. So the architecture flow begins with an application entry point known as the Spring application class. So this class initializes the Spring Boot application. So the Spring architecture flow begins with the application's entry point known as the Spring application class. This class initializes the Spring Boot application context and set up of various configurations automatically. So all the configurations are come into the live once after application starts. So the entry point is Spring application class. So the next Spring Boot scans the applications class part to identify a components and configures and configurations using its auto configuration mechanism. So as we already saw in the difference between Spring framework and Spring Boot, so the main feature of Spring Boot, or it focuses mainly on auto configuration. So once the application up and running, so all the configuration automatically configured with the help of auto configuration mechanism in the Spring Boot. It significantly reduces the need for manual configuration, saving developers time and effort. So it has eliminated XML configuration, which is a deployment descriptor. Completely configuration file itself it eliminated, and it made developer task much easier with the help of auto configuration mechanism. During the application startup, the Spring Boot takes advantage of embedded servers such as Tomcat, Jetty, Undertow, etc. To facilitate easy deployment. These embedded server eliminates the need for separate server installation and provides a seamless runtime environment for the application. So again, the manual process of a server installation and deploying our application into the server, these all completely eliminated with the help of embedded server. So once the application starts up, so it will deploy into the default embedded server. If you want particular server, it has a sum of the embedded server. In that, default is Tomcat. So if you want particular embedded server, then we have to configure that. So once our application starts, it will automatically deploy into the embedded server. This is all about the Spring Boot architecture theoretically. Let's see the same layer into the in practical way in the IDE. So I have an EMS application. So you can see I am not including any server here. So you can see there is no server tab over here. So I didn't include any of the servers. So let's see in the pom.xml. So I just added the web. So inside web itself, the Tomcat is enabled. So we can just include one starter which has included a default Tomcat server. So if you want particularly other than Tomcat, like Jetty or some other server, so you have to exclude Tomcat from this starter and include that particular dependency over here. So now let's see the layers. So let's see the application class itself. So this is an entry point. This is my main entry class. So we have to include this this annotation, that is Spring Boot application. This is an entry point. So it has some other configuration as well. So this is the main class, and now let's see, this is a client once controller. So once client sends requests, then we have to have a controller. So let's see, the rest is a controller. So this is the main controller. So this is controller layer. So then after that, the service layer. This is the service layer. So you can see I am not including any service. Observe carefully, I am not including at service on interface. Okay, so I didn't include. So this is my service. So this is a service class. So I am annotating with the at service. So it will implement all the interface functionality over here. So it has included. If you see employee repository, this is an interface. This is an interface. So I didn't include any repository on top of this. Let's see this one. So you can see no repository bin. So here for employee repository, I am just extending JPA repository. So you can see in this is not an interface. I'm not implementing any particular functionalities like CRUD operation. I'm not doing, but I'm just extending a CRUD service. So JPA repository. So it internally have a CRUD repository itself. So this is a CRUD repository. So I'm just extending JPA repository. So for employee, and this is a ID and the entity. So I'm not you can observe carefully, I'm not implementing anything. I have just a class and extending JPA repository, that's it, which internally calls a CRUD repository. We can directly implement a CRUD repository as well, which includes a pagination, JPA repository and CRUD repository. I'm just including JPA repository according to EMS. So in the service, I'm just injecting or I'm auto wiring it. So you can see employee repository, I'm just auto wiring. So dependency injection in the service. So I am injecting this particular repository over here. So this is how it eliminated. So before that, here one layer will come, that is an repository. So that repository will have exactly like this interface repository, and will have all these methods, these implementation again in the repository, and repository will make complete all the querying to the DB, everything will happen. So here I'm not querying anything in the DO. I'm not doing any logic, I'm not writing any query, but still it will execute. So how? So you can see a repository dot find all. I'm not writing in this. Do you find any find all methods? Nothing. So it is inherited from this, from JPA repository itself, JPA repository implementation. So it the implementation is over here, over there. So you can see get query. So internally it will create the query. So complete implementation is inside the CRUD repository or JPA repository itself. You can extend that particular class or implement that particular interface accordingly. So even for save also I didn't write anything. So even for save also I didn't write anything, but if you see again persist, internally it will do the transaction. So this is how the repository it has eliminated without here no need to write any basic queries and all. So this is eliminated. It is not forcing us to implement any repository. So this is about the Spring Boot architecture. So this is how the Spring Boot architecture works. So if we have a specifically, if we want specifically querying to database, then we have to include. It's not mandatorily we should remove it, but we can include as well. So that's all about the Spring Boot architecture. If you still have any doubts, please drop in the comment box. I'll make sure to clear your doubts. If you really like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to MasterJSkills. Thanks again for watching.